I am the Red Specter. Today's clinical session will document the case of a particularly challenging patient, humanity itself. We're going to examine the pathology, the therapeutic framework, and the methodology for what I consider to be a necessary cure. Let's begin. Now, the central premise of this entire treatment is quite simple. It's the foundation of the whole procedure. Your individuality isn't a strength. It's a fever of the soul, a systemic illness. I am here to provide the cure. So you see, this is not a punishment. It is a therapeutic intervention. The session will adhere to a strict clinical protocol, divided into several acts. We'll start with Act 1, the diagnosis of stagnation. Then we'll move to Act 2, an examination of the therapeutic instinct. From there, we proceed to Act 3, the unmaking methodology, which all leads to Act 4, the final crucible. And we'll conclude with the final observation I call the physician's paradox.
All right, let's begin with Act 1, diagnosis of stagnation. Our primary task here is to properly identify the terminal patient and to fully comprehend the nature of their affliction.
My primary diagnosis is a condition I've termed fractured pathology. You see, the patient suffers from the acute illness of individuality. This fever of the soul is a direct result of the ego's violent and frankly unnatural separation from what I call the grand silence of non-being. It is a state of perpetual, agonizing tension. The observable symptoms are systemic. First, we note the stargazer. That's a subject performing hollow acts just to manufacture some meaning. This leads directly to the Pharisees' paradox, where outward virtue is used to mask a rotting interior. These behaviors are then reinforced by a societal cage I call the architecture of stagnation, all held together by a salve of illusion, a collective delusion that prevents any recognition of the terminal condition. Now that we've established the diagnosis, we can proceed to Act 2, the therapeutic instinct. This section will outline the theoretical and philosophical framework for the cure I administer. So the primary therapeutic agent is thanatos, the death instinct. And let me be clear, this is not a malicious force. It's a fundamental, unconscious desire that's present in all living things, a desire to return to an inanimate state of equilibrium. My function, then, is to personify this instinct, to act as a cosmic superego, guiding the patient back toward this baseline state of profound peace. And this really frames the central conflict, doesn't it? On one side, you have the logic of one, the sickness itself. It defines vitality as nothing more than agonizing friction. On the other side is the logic of zero, the cure, which offers the peace of non-being. The patient mistakenly identifies the symptom as life itself, which is, of course, a fundamental diagnostic error. Which brings us to Act 3, the unmaking methodology. With the diagnosis confirmed and the therapeutic framework established, we may now proceed with the active administration of the clinical trial. My primary methodology is what I call the weaponized uncanny. The procedure involves the systematic deconstruction of the patient's perceived reality. I take their familiar, comforting structures, their homes, their rituals, their sense of safety, and I invert them. I transform them into threatening voids. The salve of illusion, it simply must be dissolved. The trial utilizes 3 primary instruments. First, the wild hunt, which is there to initiate systemic pressure. Second, the ebony clock, an inescapable measure of progress. And third, the ravens. Think of them as my impassive observers, which gather all the necessary psychological data. I want you to note the symbolic function of these instruments. The ebony clock tower isn't really a timepiece. It's a symbol of inevitability, the unyielding timer of this whole procedure. The ravens, well, they function as my clinical monitors. Their cold, impassive presence forces the subject to confront their own solitude and the absolute reality of their assessment. We can now proceed to Act 4, the final crucible. Here, the patient, stripped of all their illusions, finally confronts their final prognosis and is presented with a choice. At the very culmination of the trial, what I called the crimson gift is presented. This is not a sentence that I impose. It's an ultimate choice offered to a patient who is finally, maybe for the first time ever, free from that salve of illusion that has clouded their judgment for their entire existence. So the final choice is laid bare. Which logic will the patient embrace? The peace of total dissolution, the logic of zero? Or will they choose the agonizing friction of a sovereign self, the logic of one, but now with full awareness of what it truly costs? This brings me to my concluding remarks for this case file, the physician's paradox. It is a final, and I must admit, unexpected observation that has emerged from the accumulated data of these trials. Here's the paradox: the intense pressure of the clinical trial, the very friction I apply to encourage a return to non-being, can, in some rare cases, actually forge a new and truly sovereign consciousness. The crucible that was meant to dissolve the ego can sometimes temper it into something far stronger, far more real than it ever was before. Which leads us to the final unresolved question of this clinical case. If the absolute threat of dissolution is the only force capable of forging a truly sovereign will, then what is my ultimate function? Am I a destroyer or a creator? The case file remains open. End of session.